Greetings, Meredith.
Hello.
Welcome to Rangeley.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here, at least virtually.
Excuse me. Translators asked me to take my mask down when I'm speaking. Our first speaker this afternoon, Meredith Keator, will be speaking on somatics in the 21st century. And from her bio, if you haven't looked at it yet on the website, Meredith was raised in a family lineage of healing, originating through her Finnish heritage, and she's the director of the Somatic Stretch Training Program. She's trained in shiatsu and acupuncture in the early 90s, and Meredith teaches accelerated healing skills to somatic therapists of all modalities to increase treatment results through more direct access to the nervous system. A pioneer in the field of Eastern and Western integrative sciences, she's developed neural resonance therapy, a therapeutic approach to gain greater access to neural frequency for accelerated healing results. Her research in this field since 1996 has unearthed an understanding of geometric precision in the body that appears to mirror the information we're currently witnessing in the universe on a fractal and holographic level. You may remember this discussion coming up the other day with our colleague from Italy. She teaches classes and workshops and has been an avid reader and researcher in the somatic field. Wilhelm Reich has been a foundational influence in her work since the 1980s, as she pursues a strong collective within the healing arts to raise awareness around the integration of alternative and allopathic practices. Meredith, thanks very much for speaking with us today.
Thank you very much for having me at the conference this year to speak. I really appreciate it, and also want to really give kudos to all of you. The speakers have been amazing. I've really enjoyed this conference, and I know the technical stuff is amazing. And I just saw Chris Ross playing, and I didn't realize that was going to actually be filmed. So I wasn't there, and just tell Chris that I'm a singer-songwriter too, and I've taken so much inspiration from his work. I love his songs.
I think we're going to have to consider issuing that as a DVD.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, really, he's amazing.
Well, he doesn't even know that video exists, so.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Well, that was really nice to see just before speaking. So thanks for sharing that. So hello, everyone. I'm going to just jump into my PowerPoint. I've got a lot to go through today, and I will try to speak slowly. I tend to not speak slowly, so I'm going to do my best. Can you all see that? All right. David?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I'm the founder of neural resonance therapy, which we're going to discuss today, which is around the idea of geometric planes of energy in the body and how we can really see a weaving of East and West. And I'm also a lineage holder of what my family calls somatic stretch, and I'm going to talk more about that. So I will just talk about myself as we go in through the journey today. So I'm going to work with the question of what has changed in our general knowledge about the body and its energy system since Reich's time, and even before Reich's time, in fact, that makes his work more relevant and intriguing today. So we're going to cover the concept of fractals, which Gino Ferri, I was thrilled to hear talk about in relation to character analysis on Tuesday. And we're going to talk about tensegrity and what we're kind of looking at currently in quantum physics. Obviously a short version of that, and also more clarity on the ancient philosophies such as traditional Chinese medicine that I was trained in, Kundalini, understanding Tantra, Yantra, and Mantra that are inclusive of sexual energy and the evolution of consciousness, which I think is a really kind of my main point in a lot of ways. So we're also going to talk about eventually why I think we need a center for the study of orgasm in every major city, and why that's important. And we're going to also round off our talk with how crazy Reich may or may not have been to suggest that sexual energy or energy and cancer are in any way connected, just because I really want to address this most controversial side of his work, but from a more simple somatic perspective to see if we can draw a more linear straight line I'm not an academic. I'm not a psychotherapist. So I'm a student of the body, and I'm coming to this all from a very somatic perspective. And I'm going to share the research that I've been involved in over the last 25 years in weaving ideas together. So I've been trained, as Jim was saying, in shiatsu, Eastern diagnostics, and acupuncture back in the 90s. And I've been in private practice ever since, not as an acupuncturist. When I moved from Canada, the States didn't actually allow for any of my training. And I wasn't financially in a position to continue, but I use all of that understanding in my research, which has been really invaluable. And when I work hands-on, because you can do a lot with your hands that you can really also do with needles. So before I start, I want to, first of all, plant a thread that's going to be running through the talk. And that is that back in the day when Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism were gaining form from the 6th century onwards, religion or philosophy and medicine and politics all traveled together. And whoever had the best medicine gained the most followers, which makes sense because turning illness into health is really its own kind of magic. And we feel powerless in the face of death, as clearly illustrated in the last couple of years. And so solving the mystery between the seen and the unseen world is still the holy grail of physics today. And to try to understand this link between the world of relativity and the unseen quantum world. So I'm going to start with fractals, and I'm going to just share with you a video that I pulled from a program. My 25 years of research I finally created a program called Fractal Anatomy and the Geometry of Healing. And I just want to show you that video. Where do I go? What does I do? New share? New share? Oh, here we go. Yeah, right. Oh, advanced. There we go. And video. And then find the video. Oh, it's not letting me find video. Share. Here we go. Okay, and David, just let me know if the sound is good on this. Unsupported format. Please try different files. This is my concern. Let's see. Well, this was my greatest fear. All come to life. Hold on a second.
Didn't we test this?
We did test it, yeah. So I'm going to video. I'm going to try the MP4 because maybe the MOV isn't working.
Okay.
There we go.
That looks better.
Yeah, doesn't it? Okay. This is a little short on fractals.
We have sound.
Great.
There is a haunting, if deceptive, modernity in the notion, so often celebrated by Baroque poets and thinkers, that arteries and the branches of trees, the dancing motion of the microcosm and the solemn measures of the spheres, the markings on the back of the tortoise and the veined patterns on rocks, are all ciphers. Fractals are patterns that repeat themselves at different scales, like Russian dolls that fit into one another, or like people coming out of people, or how lungs, rivers, and trees all have the same pattern but manifest so differently. Fractals are a field of mathematics that was more fully formulated by Benoit Mandelbrot, a self-taught visionary mathematician who was largely responsible for developing the field of fractal geometry in the 1970s, and who also gave this area of study the name fractal after the Latin fractus, meaning broken or irregular. Math is a language that uses numbers that create shapes, and this fractal image was created by Mandelbrot, who further illustrated how fractals can occur not only in mathematics, but throughout all of nature. It is the ability for something to scale from the very small to the very large by using a common pattern that makes it fractal. A fractal is not just a pattern repeating itself, it is a pattern that gets larger and smaller and yet looks the same, like Alice down the looking glass. It's just these kinds of patterns that Eastern medical systems are based on. Thousands of years of medical insights were crafted by closely watching and understanding the patterns of the natural world and applying those same patterns to the human body and environment to prevent illness or heal the sick. The Chinese referred to this phenomenon of finding patterns within patterns, Li, and while translations of that word are numerous, as a concept it embodies both our notions of pattern as well as principle, form as well as thought. In the book Science and Civilization in China, Joseph Needham writes, Li reflect the order and patterns in nature, but it is not pattern thought of as something dead like a mosaic. It is dynamic pattern, as embodied in all things living and in human relationships and in the highest human values. Patterns such as these tend to be fairly simple, and yet they contain a high degree of information. There are many kinds of patterns in nature, such as branching patterns, that are found not only in lungs, trees, and rivers or lightning, but in the neurons of your brain, your gut, and in certain cells of your heart. Even how the heart beats is fractal, and doctors at Harvard have learned to look at the pattern of a heartbeat to avoid more invasive measures to test heart health. The more consistent the patterns of a heartbeat are, whether viewed on an ECG with close magnification or further away, the healthier the heart is. When the fractal nature starts to break down in the heartbeat, so does the heart. Tumors are becoming better understood and diagnosed earlier due to the fractal nature of their behavior, and our cell phone antennas conduct energy through a fractal structure that allows for a lot of activity to happen in a very small space. Any and all patterns offer a structure that provide easy and broad access to areas, whether they transit water, electrical impulses, oxygen, or nutrients. Removing the word lung or neuron or lightning leaves only the pattern of its expression behind. Patterns found in all of nature can offer us insight into new areas we don't yet understand by overlaying a pattern and finding similarities between structures or systems that formerly seemed disconnected. As man is of nature, then watching nature gives us insight into the workings of man. Fractals are a vocabulary of shapes that offer an explanation to growth patterns. Having a template to growth patterns is helpful not only in how tumors grow or how mountains are formed, but to anything that grows, quickly or slowly, small or large. And from there we have unlocked a key where the ancient past meets the current physics. It's a vocabulary that is being used in medicine, the stock market, technology, and in your body. To think fractals only exist in mathematics is like saying numbers only exist in the world of, say, accounting, and not in the grocery store, or in your bank account, or on your telephone. Once you understood numbers, you found them everywhere, and the same goes for fractals. Scaling patterns are everywhere, and utilizing them has been a way of unlocking the mysteries of our world and our bodies for millennia. Fractal is our new word for pattern thinking, or Li, and when we lay the umbrella of geometry over an expression of energy flow in the body, we can find a language between East and West, and watch the face of medicine evolve even further as we learn more about our own innate ability to heal.
Okay, so as you can see, fractals are a very new term for a very ancient concept. And how does this really relate to our psychology? So if we consider, for instance, Joseph Campbell, who became rather mythical and a mythical legend unto himself because of his work, he really talked about the hero's journey as a passage of time. And he got so much acclaim for his work, really, because it's an overall pattern that it doesn't really matter if you're talking about a passage of time for a child or overcoming addictions or the entire course of a life. The same pattern of a life is what's giving us much more clarity. And Reich was very much a pattern thinker. And that's what made him stand out and also confused a lot of people because they couldn't understand how he could be involved in so many different areas. So his work encompassed not only psychology and psychiatry, sexology, medicine, biology, political theory and sociology. It also included anthropology and astrophysics and meteorology, energy movement and dynamics, forward thinking even on the 0-point field, and also embryology and a synopsis of ideas that lead directly to the realm of self-perception, self-awareness, and the philosophy of consciousness. And I bring up this slide from the video because it was very interesting to see as I was looking through cosmic superimposition, how he was discussing how these two lines of orgone energy streams meet. And of course, it's the exact same spiral that a couple of speakers have spoken about, of this natural spiral nature. So we're finding underlying patterns to nature that of course have to do with the body, and our science is just working out the differences between the out there and the in here. And also his torque and path of hurricanes, you can see this kind of he's watching energy move in ways that I think he would have found very interesting in relation to understanding fractals, which were only available in, starting to come to understanding by 1985.
There's no image shared right now.
Oh, bummer. Okay, why is that happening? Huh. Let me just stop share and reshare again. Go to basic. This. Share. You can see that, yeah?
Yes, we have it now.
You have that now when I put it on
Yes.
large? Okay, great.
Yes.
So that was the shape that I was talking about from the video, this very fractal nature of the spiral that I was pulling from the video. And you can see in cosmic superimposition, these two orgone energy streams meet. Thank you for pointing that out, David. It's a bit redundant without the pictures. And you can also see in this torque and path of hurricanes, this fractal nature kind of beginning. So fractals in this spiral nature are found everywhere. And you have the ear for like auricular acupuncture as well, which mirrors the whole body, and hurricanes and the way that things grow. And you can also see very much the fractal nature of this golden spiral. So this is a 1.618 golden mean spiral that's based on the Fibonacci sequence. I go into that a lot in my program on fractal anatomy and geometry of healing, but just to kind of take a look at how it just continues to keep going and going and going, and it doesn't stop. So we're finding pattern, and we're finding the fractal nature of these iterations that move through, which I found very helpful in understanding how to really find tensions that lie more deeply in the body and help them release. And I'll explain more about that. Human brain cells, the universe, and the internet all have similar structures. Nassim Haramein, who is a physicist currently working on the unified field theory, who feels he's cracked the code. And of course, all the physicists are working on this idea, says spin is the result of a gradient in the structure of the vacuum. It's the fundamental mechanics that creates all of our reality. And you can see the hurricane and a low energy field around carbon particle and the galaxy. So this is very new, that was not around in Reich's time. So Bruce Lipton said there's a theory that explains that life is based on competition and that survival depends on struggle and fighting. It's interesting because when you look at the fractal character of evolution, it's quite different. Life is based on cooperation between the elements of geometry and not competition. So the way that I describe this idea of geometry, I don't know if you can see all of the words there from the thing, but we can only see the wind by what it affects. A treetop moving or a swirl in dust, yet the wind itself is invisible. Similarly, geometry is not the source of energy. It's an agent for the human mind to witness the invisible in action. So that's a quote from me that came out after me trying to write 3 pages. And I finally was just like, just write me. And that came out. And I think it's the best way that I know how to describe the reason geometry is significant. And we're going to see that in a number of different ways through the talk today. There's actually a really great talk on fractals that I found. It's got a very Christian lens of it, but his name is Dr. Jason Lisle, Lisle, and he's created a video called The Secret Code of Creation, and he goes very much in depth. He knows his science very well, and if you're interested in learning more about fractals, I encourage you to check that out. So this is a very familiar image, Wilder Penfield and his way of mapping the body through the brain. And there's, in fact, I think 2 bodies in the brain. One, I believe it's one relating to the sympathetic and one more relating to the parasympathetic nervous system. So it was a surprise to find that we could actually map out all of the aspects of the body just through the brain. Now, I always say that the body taught me what fractals are, and somatic stretch taught me how to use them on myself. And that allowed me to better understand how to work on bodies. And back about 20 years ago, almost, when I first began seeing this in the body, fractals was not something that you could Google. I mean, there was really nothing there. And now, if you look it up, you'll find medical information on how the hypothalamus and the hippocampus are fractal as well. So these concepts are really making their way slowly into medicine. And as you saw in the video, understanding tumor growth and how blood flow works in cancer tumors and how the heart beats. I did ask my doctor, I was like, do you check the heart? Do you kind of fractal? And he was like, no. So doctors in Harvard are discovering that, but it's slowly trickling down. So also from an Eastern point of view, or what I guess is called the alternative kind of healing arts, there's always been this idea that the eye or the ear or the hand or the foot is a mirror of the whole body, which has always seemed a little bit woo-woo, but we're seeing now that medically that actually makes a lot of sense. And what makes more sense is that if parts of the body are mirroring the whole, then you would think that all parts of the body would mirror the whole, and it wouldn't just be in pieces, because that wouldn't be the nature of fractal patterning. So if you want to have an example of what that means on your own body, you might want to take your foot and put your ankle over your other knee and start to feel your calf muscle and just work into your calf. And you'll find little sensitive areas you didn't realize that were there. And when I'm working on a body, I find that I can actually read a lot about the tension patternings that are going to be going on in the torso just by reading the calf. Now, the Chinese talk about the lower part of the calf, spleen 6, particularly as a point that is contraindicated in pregnancy because it can cause miscarriage. And I had firsthand experience of that because it also helps in birth when my friend was giving birth to her first son, my godson. And after about 30 hours of labor, I went down and I really nailed those points really, really strongly. And when she could speak later, she said, it really felt like you reached up and you grabbed Noah's head and you started pulling down. So 5,000 years of Chinese medicine isn't false. But as you're feeling through your calf, one thing I really kind of began to realize is that while the lower part of the calf relates to the lower part of the body, the middle part relates to the middle segments, and the upper part relates a lot to the upper chest and segments. There's obviously a lot to say. So as you're just kind of working through those areas, that this triad of upper, middle, lower is really helpful in being able to understand how to access the body and the tissues from a fractal perspective. Now, of course, Reich, let me just make sure I covered everything. Did I? The orgasm reflex is a fractal. So he's talking about mechanical tension leading to biological charge and discharge and mechanical relaxation. And I love that he said, I've really only ever learned one thing. And he opened and closed his hand. And that's why he could see that pattern and that pulsation that now in the somatic arts that are coming out in the psychodynamic body work, we're understanding much more clearly. So that's changed a lot, being able to actually have people work with this better understanding that pulsation is the ultimate fractal underneath, and that you're looking for pulsation and release. We're going to see that also mirrored in the ancient sciences more. Now, just to go over briefly in physics, the idea where the holy grail in physics is trying to understand the link between relativity and the quantum world. And so relativity, the unified field, was coined by Einstein, and he was trying to understand the links between the two, because the world of relativity is, of course, how all the big things move, how planets move, and how space-time curves and what have you. And the quantum world is how all the little itty-bitty bits down to quarks and leptons and everything actually function, and they don't seem to function in the same way. And that's confusing, because if you don't know how the atoms of the fibers are connected to your sweater, you don't have a sweater. So there's obviously this link. And one thing that's proving to really show more of a unified field is this idea of fractals. What I coined something called the unified field in medicine, and it's this idea of East and West moving together. And I feel, in what I've seen, that if we overlay this fractal geometric understanding over all of the different parts of the body, we get a much better idea of what we're looking at. So this is just a basic rundown.
Meredith, I'm sorry. The interpreters really can't keep up with you.
I'm not
sorry to
surprised.
interrupt.
Sorry, I talk so quickly. Sorry.
Okay.
Western physiology, we have muscles and nerves and dermatomes. And from our Eastern medical systems, we have a host of other systems in this. And I've always used Reich to be able to make a connection. He probably would have hated it at the time, but I think that maybe today he might appreciate the fact that he actually provided such very powerful links between what it is that we're knowing, obviously from the body, from the seen into the unseen. And we're keeping everything very much in a box of materiality. And I love this quote by Einstein, where he said in Faraday's day, and Faraday was, of course, he was the one who brought us electromagnetism that Maxwell then went on to further. Einstein said in Faraday's day, there did not yet exist the dull specialization that stares through horn-rimmed glasses and destroys poetry. And I think that that's really a way to kind of look at how we've been addressing things. I'm going to look at one aspect of those energy systems of Kundalini and what we know about it and what we don't. And I'm going to quote a lot from a book by Gopi Krishna called Living with Kundalini, which is an excellent book to read. He very much wanted to have science look at his body and use his body as a way of understanding this phenomenon of Kundalini. This word is getting thrown around a lot now, much like enlightenment. And I think that we have to be careful about trying to take extremely vast subjects that the mind can't really comprehend and feeling that we understand them and putting them in a box. And he talks about that. So Kundalini is Sanskrit for a serpentine or twisting motion, the spiral motion. It moves along a middle path of energy known as Sushumna, with the nadis known on each side as Ida and Pingala. It's known as the serpent power, the snake-like movement through the body, laying coiled at the sacral plexus where it rests upon the coccyx, the triangular bone at the end of the sacrum, and that there's 3 lines of force through the body. And this is just a visual interpretation by Mantak Chia of this idea of there being 3 lines through the body. And this is found in every system. That's a very quick version of that.
Sorry to interrupt. We're told by the translator that you don't have to speak slower necessarily, but if you pause more frequently, that helps.
I'd have to breathe then, Jim. Allow me to work on my somatic practices. Okay, so excerpts from the book Living with Kundalini. The founders of the practice of Kundalini yoga found that acquiring a certain degree of mind control and concentration could draw up through the hollow backbone a vividly bright, fast-moving, powerful radiance into the brain for short periods of time in the beginning, and then extending the duration with practice, which had a most amazing effect on the mind, enabling it to soar to regions of surpassing glory beyond anything experienced in the crude material world. They named the channel Sushumna. The systems of nerves on the left and the right were named Ida and Pingala. His personal experience is, he wrote, suddenly, with a roar like that of a waterfall, I felt a stream of liquid light entering my brain through the spinal cord. I experienced a rocking sensation, an illumination, and then felt myself slipping out of my body, entirely enveloped in a halo of light. It's impossible to describe the experience accurately. I was a vast circle of consciousness in which the body was but a point bathed in light and in a state of exaltation and happiness impossible to describe. Now, obviously, this is a mystical experience that Reich was always trying to get away from. And yet within all of the ancient sciences that we have, there are these types of experience of expanded consciousness that all of their philosophies are based on. He says it is a fact that some of the inmates of mental clinics evince paranormal faculties and show signs of behavior peculiar to those in whom Kundalini is aroused. And there's also a great book by Lee Sanella, who is a psychotherapist, analyst, brainiac, great guy. A book called Kundalini Transcendence or Psychosis. And I think a lot of you in the more academic fields would really appreciate reading that. And those in the non-academic fields too. With the start of this new activity, the normal strength and pattern of bioenergy becomes insufficient to feed the brain. Supply from a new source becomes imperative to preserve sanity and life because of the intensity of the rush through the body and through the nervous system that's wired to hold a certain amount of charge. This new and most potent source of psychic energy is provided by the reproductive system. How the reversal of the action of the generative organs and the activity of the paranormal chamber comes into effect, only sustained research on Kundalini will disclose. And the location and activation of the center in the brain that they call the Brahmarandra, allows it to command all parts of the brain and the entire nervous system with a direct connection with the reproductive organs through the spinal canal. So I don't know how familiar people are with this idea of the history within Kundalini, but this is what I wanted to focus on. And I'm sorry, this is the last bunch of words here on the slide. He says, in those cases where Kundalini is perennially active in an organism, it is this state of upward flow of the seminal energy into the brain, which is known as Urdhva Redis in Sanskrit. The incessant and rapid natural suction of the reproductive secretions that occur at this time is the only way open to nature to save the brain from damage. So it's pulling on one of the strongest power sources in the body in order to amplify what's going on through the nervous system. It's drawn from every part of the body through the nerves, lining the genital organs to meet the highly increased demand without interruptions. So this is a man who read all the Sanskrit texts and knew what was being written for thousands of years. When the adjustment of the nervous system is complete, this reverse action of the reproductive organs becomes a normal function of the body. Immoderation in erotic pleasure can have far-reaching consequences. It's evident that there is a close connection between the evolving center in the brain and the so-called abode of Kundalini, meticulously described in the ancient texts. Analyzed in the context of present knowledge, the proximity of Kundalini to the reproductive organs signifies its command over a source of surplus energy, available to meet the demands of the system. A depleted store of reproductive energy, low energy in sexual organs, in an individual can prove seriously detrimental when Kundalini is suddenly aroused. In fact, one of the reasons why a spontaneous activation of Kundalini often ends in mental disorder is the fact that in addition to a faulty genetic heritage or unhealthy organic structure of the body, the excess expenditure of the reproductive essences can cause ravages in the system, which make adaptation to the new activity of the brain impossible. The aim of yoga is to attain a new dimension of consciousness and to build a new personality and rapport, both with the visible and the unseen occult worlds. And then finally, his note, those who believe that the arousal and mastery of this force can be achieved by one's willful effort alone, which is kind of really spoken about a lot, come to this class and just raise your Kundalini. He says that you live in a paradise of fools. The impulse for God realization or the urge to gain occult powers in its psychosomatic origin is parallel to the growing erotic impulse and its satisfaction in the mind of the adolescent. It's not a motivation subservient to our will to be channeled as we choose, but a deep-rooted impulse coming up from the unfathomable depths of the psyche, in which the brain, too, plays a vital part. How am I doing? Am I speaking properly? We're going to move on to Tantra and the aspects of that. So I'm going to take some words from a woman named Madhu Kanu, who wrote a book on the Sri Yantra. And this Sri Yantra is really particularly a geometry that has to do with the phenomenology of consciousness. And so we're seeing this world of geometry, and a lot of people are wearing it on their t-shirts. And it really is the way of mapping the invisible world that we can't see. And yet it has these ancient origins of what these geometries do. So yantras, which are geometries, such as this is the flower of life. Kabbalic structure, which we're not even going to get into today, but there's a lot to say about that in relation to the energy patterns that we're finding. And then the Sri Yantra here as well. So these yantras are symbols in ancient Indian philosophy, and there are mantras that go with them. And the yantras are the geometric shapes, and the mantras are the sonic component of the yantra. Every yantra must be activated. Every yantra must be activated by a mantra, and every yantra or geometry has a sound pattern to it. And this sound resonance works with the geometry that relates to the body and the consciousness, activating centers in the brain and the body and elevating consciousness. So Tantra is not just a sexual act. It's not just a way to have a better orgasm. It's really a process of conscious evolution using the energy of sexuality to accelerate evolutionary wisdom. So if we go back and we look at this star tetrahedral shape, the purpose of Tantra is to unite the state of union of bliss embodied by what they call Shiva and Shakti. And Shiva and Shakti are just these male and female principles. This is the triangle up and the triangle down, interfacing with one another, representing the positive and negative impulses that create the world that we live in. So this sacred play of this world of phenomenology that involutes then back to the center, the sacred play of involution and evolution, is the same pattern that Reich was talking about in this fundamental fractal form. And so we're seeing that the ancients are using words like deities, like Brahma, which represents creation, and Vishnu, which represents maintenance, and Shiva, which represents the destruction or the recreation. And so you can hear how the physics is being described by using deities, geometry, sound frequency in order to affect consciousness. So in quoting Madhukana, she talks about these geometries that evolve around the concept of how you're positioned in the context of the larger consciousness, of the larger cosmos. And so the questions that arise are, again, about levels of consciousness, and can we lead an ethical life and empower ourselves? And how can we use the pure energy of consciousness to leave the planet a better place? So positioning is important, she says. If you look upon yourself as just a material being, matter with no spirit, then yantras and mantras have no meaning. But this path comes with a huge theory on how to tame the subtle body. And they're a whole map of the subtle body and how those energy systems can be awakened. That's what the geometry is representing to them. So Mark Seam, who's an acupuncturist I studied with back in the day, says that with the emergence of a new paradigm of health and healing, should I be moving this? I can't even actually use any of my cursors while this is on. With the emergence of a new paradigm of health and healing, embodying a truly holistic perspective, the need for an appropriate theory of energy is keenly felt. The Western medical model may well be the only one in history that has not put forth an energetic concept of health and disease. All other healing systems are based on a philosophy of energy or vital force. And Reich, of course, said it's sexual energy which governs the structure of human feeling and thinking. So I want to now draw a parallel to some words about the politics in traditional Chinese medicine. And I'm going to read a quote from a book called Nourishing Destiny by Lonnie Jarrett, The Inner Tradition of Chinese Medicine. So just to kind of understand that these philosophies really have a basis of what we can only define as a spiritual aspect that we don't have in the way that philosophy and politics and medicine model today. He writes, in 1958, Chairman Mao issued a decree that the Chinese government would supervise the development of a state-run medical system in which traditional Chinese medicine, otherwise known as TCM, would be practiced side by side with Western medicine. This development through the 70s was constrained by the requirement that it adhere to the ideological views of Marxism. Dialectical materialism, which denotes Marxism, literally means a discussion of those aspects of life that are materially real. The movement to scientize Chinese medicine meant subjecting it to the scrutiny of the analytic method. Analytic science, though ideal for studying the quantitative aspects of structure, is incapable of meaningfully assessing human physiological functions that encompass physical as well as emotional and spiritual realms of being. Through gross manipulation of source material, the Marxists rewrote the history and theory of Chinese medicine to reflect the interests of the state in perpetuating communism. So, in standardizing their state-run medical systems, the ruling party sought to eliminate all aspects of Chinese medical theory that empowered the fulfillment of individual destiny. Virtue and destiny is completely intertwined in the whole nature of traditional Chinese medicine before the Marxist intervention there. The Marxists did make some strides helping to overcome superstition and modernize their nation. However, in crafting their state-run medical system, they failed to value the deeper spiritual aspects of healing that lie at the heart of traditional Chinese medicine. So this idea of virtue and destiny is completely interwoven in many things. And the last thing that I'm going to read of his, he said, the ultimate fate of all things is to return to the Tao. to return to the flow. And we're given the chance to do this at each moment in life by fulfilling destiny and cultivating virtue. So I just point that out, that as this trinity of of our medicine and politics and our philosophies travel, the ancients did all have a very different perspective. And even the ancient Greeks had a concept of arete. And in its most basic sense, that refers to excellence of any kind and personal potential coming to its fullest awareness. So while our ancient cultures didn't have everything all worked out, it's clear that we have a dearth of this guiding force that we might call morality, but there's really a higher calling that leads to mystical states of insight that we're still intending on extricating from the formula. And I'm not sure really how that can work, because without the awe of the mystery, we lose our humanity and our humility. So I'm just going to dive into a little bit about what the body has taught me and what my family has taught me, because I was raised in this work called Somatic Stretch. This is my grandfather and my grandmother and my uncle. My uncle went on to become an osteopath. And my grandfather was a Finnish masseur. They emigrated from Finland in the 30s. And my grandfather was a masseur and a herbalist in Toronto before anybody really knew what massage was. And that's him in a tree. I guess, and because that's how we roll. And my mother was a very famous dancer with the National Ballet of Canada. And she grew up having her father work on her and always stretching. And when she got pregnant with me, she really wanted to figure out the sway back and the knock knees that she had that you can't see in this picture, but that prevented her from the full mobility that she wanted to embody. So she was stretching 3 and 4 hours a day on the floor while I was in her womb. And so I've literally been raised in this work and started teaching in the 80s when I was a teenager. And so somatic stretch is important because out of all the tech, we work with the stretch reflex in a really different way. And it's really about relaxing to find a stretch rather than reaching. And this is important because it changes reflexes in the body. And a lot of times people don't really relate to what relaxing to stretch means. So you might want to just try, as you're sitting in your chair, wherever you are, to just drop your chin to your chest and really focus on relaxing everything. Take a really deep breath in and just relax all the way down. Use your inner vision to really just take a look and see what you're holding and where. Drop the diaphragm, drop the shoulders, and just let everything settle like a pebble, just slowly working its way down to the bottom of a still lake. And as you do that, you start to notice areas that you were holding that you didn't realize that you're holding. And you'll notice that stretch and sensation start to appear. And there's a lot of discussion around sensation as a path. A lot of speakers have spoken about it. And this is definitely what I found, that it's the sensation that allows us the contact between the subconscious and conscious mind, where not only physical tensions release, but the awareness of how our body holds mirrors our mind and teaches us about our own psychology. So you can just even move your head a little bit slowly from one side to the other, but our thoughts tend to lead. You're thinking about where you should go instead of letting your body just do you. So I describe the term somatic as when we are learning this way of being able to let the body do what it wants to do and we follow it. And a lot in somatic stretch that I do, and I teach classes online twice a week by donation so that everybody can work with their own health. That what we're doing in that exploration is learning more and more the sensory system of the body and showing the mind exactly what's holding where. And it's actually that process that has allowed me to see the geometry in the body. So work and stretch however you would like while we're talking. I am going to show another picture. Oh, I have to do this again. So I'm going to have to switch back and forth. And David, you'll just have to tell me if everything is showing the way it should. So this is just a very quick visual representation of what kind of angles of geometry I'm going to go over in a moment. Show. You can hear that, David? hear that?
Yeah, we've got it.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to just go back to sharing my screen in that other fashion so that you can still see my PowerPoint. Where are we? So I found something very interesting as I started to find geometry patterning in the body, and I really felt that it was planes of energy moving through, finding intersection points. And I'm going to talk about, therefore, how I work a little bit and where the Reichian perspective fits in the way that I work. But first, I want to show you, this is a picture of a woman named Aya Koski, and she creates these beautiful geometries out of rye that are called himmeli. And in Finland, these shapes are hung over tables at Christmas and what have you, and they've been around for nobody really knows how long. You can see they make these really beautiful geometric shapes. And it was shown to me, it was introduced to me when a friend of mine from Finland had come over to my house, and she saw that I had these very fine bamboo sticks and a glue gun. And I was trying to glue things together to understand the angles and planes I was really seeing when I was working on a body. And that when I would go into the body and relate more to core, the nervous system would jump and release more. And I was getting really interesting results. So she sent this to me and she said, look what our ancestors have always been doing. And I just found that to be a very interesting coincidence. And they look very much like the geometries in physics that we're working with. This is the isotropic vector matrix by Buckminster Fuller that creates the strongest energetic structure, for instance. Now, moving into the idea of tensegrity, it's a term first used by Buckminster Fuller, and he, of course, did all the geodesic domes. And this is a needle tower by Kenneth Snelson. So this tensegrity is a way of having these struts that actually hold themselves up in order to contain a hole in the middle and hold itself up. So tensegrity is something new that was not talked about until Buckminster Fuller. So that wouldn't have been around in Reich's time either. And it's really interesting that when you look up the bottom of the needle, that you see this same kind of geometry and shape. And I want you just to remember that picture when I show you what I ended up discovering in the body. And this was before I knew anything about geometry or tensegrity. And I love telling people that I failed math in high school. I am hopeless with numbers. It was the most boring class I could ever imagine. And so when I'm working with geometry, all of these ideas came through sensory awareness, and then finding the intellectual material between the East and the West to pull together this theory about it. So I've been pretty obsessed about it for all of these years. So in looking at it in the body, you saw this idea, and I want you to pay attention to particularly the red dots there. And these red centers, it's a way of working to core. So for instance, if you put your hand on the top of your shoulder and you rub into the area that always bugs you, right? That's called gallbladder 21 in acupuncture. And your sensory system is usually, right, there's a point right between the acromion at the end here and C7, right at the very top there. And it's where a lot of people get a lot of tension because we're thinking, breathing, holding, and pulling up. And all of this tension gets very locked up into all these segments. But your sensory system is largely feeling what's between your fingers and the first maybe quarter inch thinking in. And people say, oh, that's your trapezius. But in cadaver dissection, your trapezius is like a little thin layer, like a napkin. It's not just your trapezius, that's just what's laying over the top. But imagine for a moment that the core of tension in the breath holding is actually coming from the middle of the body. And one of the really good ways to get into what's happening at the top of the shoulder is to be able to actually use your mind to think in and feel the connection deep inside here. Now, this connection you'll be familiar with because it will be where your pec hurts here. And it's where that nagging pain in the side of your shoulder blade comes up. But instead of thinking pec and shoulder blade, think in the middle. So the Chinese say that the 10,000 diseases arise from the hara, and the hara is your organ systems. And that's something that we learn in acupuncture school and then regurgitate on exams. But it's really spoken to me a lot ever since I started working in practice and through the years, because it's really saying that everything that's in distortion begins in the inner body. And of course, all of the psychodynamic therapies and what people have been talking about is the center in relation to the periphery. But our sensory system doesn't really go down there. So I think all of us are involved in different somatic practices that allow us to relate to this inner sensation. And that's what's really helping this unlocking happen. So when you're working on a body or working on yourself, or even stretching your arm out, if you move your arm to the side and start to really rotate through the shoulder, but keep dropped in the chest, you start really rolling, you'll feel a stretch. You're not reaching or pulling so much. You're just letting the body show you what it's feeling. But now bring your mind deep into the middle here. And a breath for me automatically releases because my nervous system is responding to the fact that my brain is getting closer to where the core release is. And just for fun, I have to say that I find it hilarious to talk about the nervous system because my nervous system is talking to your nervous system, talking about itself. And that's just really weird. So what are these core ideas? Let's just take one of those little red dots and look at it from this Buckminster Fuller perspective. This is Bucky with his buckyball, which is a tensegrity form that collapses and expands. So it's showing the same pulsation kind of nature. Now you can see the material aspect and you can analyze the struts and the tension, but what it's actually holding is the middle, and that's where the power is. And we're very used to thinking on the surface, even with the body. When I'm teaching people somatic stretch, I'm always like, you can see where the mind is actually thinking, and the mind is thinking on the top. And so when you're working with your own body, learning to see and feel inside is a really great way to release. And that's the primary aspect of my work. Now, I thought as I was going through this process as a therapist that what I was feeling was neural frequencies in the body. I had a very cathartic experience in my mid-20s that very much accelerated my sensory awareness. And I think from my family, I have a particular skill to be able to sense tissue contraction. So actually, one thing that I was going to say when we were looking at this picture is another fractal nature of the body. We're talking about this top down to bottom. That's been coming up a lot in conversation. And I just want to add my thought to that. Reich said that it wasn't good to release everything just in the pelvis because, of course, it was too powerful. And as maybe it was Renata or somebody who was writing in the chat earlier, they were going through a very concise description of why the top to bottom is important, which I entirely agree with. That being said, I also agree with Tina Lindemann and Fred Lowen, that it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a top down that I'm always working with, but there is his segments and the sensory system really allow me to go in and see where somebody is holding, and also to be able to see better what they're ready to release and what's too much for them, even in stretch class. So if I know that somebody is holding something somewhere and I get them to try to feel it when I know they can't feel it yet, allowing them and seeing where their level of consciousness into the depths of the body is where safe release is, whether you're working on a body or whether you're working with someone. Now, a fractal nature of this is that I can often, depending on the body, when working on the neck, I can get that kind of orgastic wave through the body if the body is really open, just by working in the neck. Now, to me, the middle of the tissues and the middle of the sexual center really, for lack of a better word, resonate at the same frequency. So in working on unblocking as much as you can in order to allow safe release through the body, even working on the neck and activating the very center of the throat, not just the skeletal body and the muscles, but the very center allows this whole release to happen through the body. This is a picture of light going through a sphere by Clay Taylor, who has an amazing website with a lot of information on resonance and frequency and science. And he goes above my head often. But what I find really beautiful about this is that I was really feeling that it was neural frequencies that were giving me this planes of energy idea where there were intersection points that you could more actively release the body from. And what I found fascinating is that he mapped out the pi and the phi and all of the different angles of geometry in a way that looked very much like what I was working with very similar angles. And I placed it over top of the meridian just to show for an idea how you can see those three vertical lines moving through the body. And this angle going off to the right, you can see it's not perfectly positioned, but you can see goes right into that area on the shoulder that we were just working on. And it just describes perfectly how, regardless of the modality that we work with, being able to touch a body and think into the interior definitely seems to release the structure much more effectively. And fasciculations can even happen in through the skin, like little waves just moving under the skin as well. These are the three dantians. And I just show that for a visual understanding. That throat part's supposed to be blue, but that in the ancient Kabbalic text, there's also this idea of the same three centers, from the inferior to the middle of the chest at the supreme level, and then the superior level. And I find it interesting that there's this star tetrahedral shape right there as well. So in looking at this image, this is kind of the best 2D description that I can make of what I see / feel when I look and intuit a body. And it, of course, in all of what we've been discussing, it's the center to the periphery, and yet it really goes beyond the periphery as well. And I loved Tina Lindemann's talk and the video that she showed with her mentor working on her. And I love the point where she's forward, she can't see him behind her, and he just pulls energy like strings and her whole body starts to release. And so we're really coming much more into a time of being able to understand that energy, the human body is really just like tissue paper, and that the center and the core life source energy of the body is in fact illuminating and radiating not just from the center to the periphery, but well beyond it. And we're having some really amazing therapies come out that work very constructively with that. Right, so it turns into this very double terminated crystalline structure, interestingly, with points of intersection, and yet this is a fractal shape. So remembering that tensegrity needle, I just want to show you that this is the shape that is really what ended up showing itself to me before I knew geometry, before I understood tensegrity, and it was just helping me get into the body better, and yet it really does represent this toroidal flow. And in the chat earlier, whoever was responding about the top to bottom was talking about the fact that pulsation doesn't move just up or just down. They have to move simultaneously. And the toroidal field is something that's around every atom, every human, every planet, and what have you. So as we start to understand more about the electromagnetic spectrum, this is, of course, how we describe it, like a line. But if we could, of course, see the radio waves and the microwaves and X-rays and internet in the room, it wouldn't look like a straight line. And just stop to consider for a moment what those frequencies actually look like if you could see them. And one of the best tools to describe them better than a line is geometric shape. So this visible spectrum in the middle is the only thing that we can see in a complete sea of invisibles. And we know that the electromagnetic spectrum is infinite, theoretically. So as we start really discovering what these other frequencies are, I don't think it's going to be long before we hit our biology and notice that we're able to quantify these energies more. As Fred said, you can't scientifically quantify these energies, but we're getting closer, hopefully, to doing that. And maybe that will end up looking like Star Trek, where you can just scan something through and you have a better idea of the health of your organ systems. So now I just want to go into, I think we're at like an hour. Oh, a little bit more than that, maybe. I can't see the time.
It's 2:02.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I want to go into the idea of cancer, this idea that that Reich was talking about. And this is a quote that many of you would be very familiar with by Chester Raphael. Reich's theory that cancer is not primarily a tumor that arises mysteriously in an otherwise healthy organism, but a systemic disease due to chronic sexual starvation will startle the average person who tends to view a disturbance of sexuality as distressing but not pathogenic. It will also enrage many who, because of moral prejudice, find such a connection offensive and untenable, which is key. Wilhelm Reich, with unerring appreciation for the relatedness of all natural phenomena, disregarded this prejudice and included the orgasm as a subject for serious investigation. His studies eventually led to an inquiry into the exact nature of the energy expressed in the orgasm and to its demonstration not only in the living organism, but as the common functioning principle in nature. One would think that the actual proof of the existence of cosmic energy, about which man has speculated during the entire course of his history, would be eagerly received. However, the incapacity of the average human being to experience or understand his own bodily sensations, which are manifestations of the movement of this energy, has made him reject the reality of a specific force that governs his organism. Consequently, he has viewed the discovery of orgone energy by Reich as a fantasy or a fraud. So let's just take a look at that for a moment. Let's just take a look at that for a moment from a basic somatic perspective. Fred was talking about breathing, and his dad in the film was talking about the idea of breath. And we see very much that we have a thought first, and then we hold our breath, and we hold it on very, very fine levels. I really see the body like a very finely woven spider's web. And there's not a possibility, just like tensegrity, to pull on one area of it without affecting the whole. And our brain is really like the largest muscle. It's pulling energies and tissues in whatever direction. And we start to build and hold. So brain and breath begin to hold and pull in these fine little areas. Now, in doing so, that really blocks blood flow and nutrients from being able to get where it needs to. And Warburg, back in, I believe it was the 50s, was talking about how when tissues, was it the 50s? Tissues come down to 60% of oxygen level, that's where cancer begins. So it doesn't really seem like a far stretch. If we're willing to look at sexual energy as being something that is how we all got here, you think that people would want to study that and go to the origin of what it is, but we're still too repressed as a society to really allow that. And my running joke is that we're all here because an orgasm happened, hopefully two, but at the very least one. And so you would think that if we wanted to really work with the understanding of where life source is coming from, that we would actually study it and have centers for it. And our world, for some strange reason, still just isn't really ready for that. So we can discuss quantum physics and what's out in the world, but if you start talking about quantum biology, it's still something that sort of freaks out the quantum biologists. It somehow seems like we can talk about how there are these dynamics in the world, but we can't really talk about it in the body. And Reich, of course, was really one of the very first to give us that connection between the two and demand that it be looked at from a more scientific basis. So quantum biology is beginning to weave what we're seeing in the cosmos in relation to our body, but we still have quite a Cartesian hangover of still seeing how everything is separate. So I'm almost done, and I want to really just kind of make my final point, which apparently takes a while. I've really realized in the past 2 years, even though I've been reading Reich since I was 20, another whole aspect of why I really, really respect his work and appreciate it. And on top of his brilliant and prolific writing and insights into the body and mind, his willingness to draw well outside the lines of common conceptions, he also stood in a court of law and demanded to know why the Food and Drug Administration were who he had to answer to, instead of scientists and doctors. And if we summed up his political view, because of course we can't separate the politics that we create out of the philosophies that we live by and the medicines that are governed in and around that, we could say that his ardent focus was that people require an authority figure so much that they're willing to actually create a fascist society out of the very freedom that they're attempting to live by. And this is a really powerful truth. And the word fascist has been thrown around a lot on all sides in the last couple of years. And of course, we're very much paying attention to that. But Reich demanded open dialogue and debate. And I think that's pivotal. I think that's absolutely necessary. He demanded transparency and a fair trial by scientific review. He knew he was going to go in jail, and he intuited that he was going to die there. And he lived by his own standards and ethics and convictions right to his grave. And knowing that the politics that governed health and medicine was of paramount importance to engage in and to question. So I was actually confused. I know we're all tired of talking about COVID, but I just want to make a point that I was very confused in the last couple of years as to why we weren't hearing about the immune system. We were hearing a lot of things about how to take care of the external, but there was no encouragement in all the media flurry and all of the advice that we were being given to really work with ourselves. And I, for one, would have really liked to have heard, we don't really know what we're dealing with. We have to take these external protocols, and this would be a really good time to begin to work with your own immune system and your health and start to boost up your own health so that you are less less available to disease. And it actually really pissed me off. I got very, very angry about it the more and more it went on. And I was like, where are our medical authorities encouraging us to take care of us in a way that is being equally given some attention? So that's where I started teaching online for free and by donation. And I continue to do that because I feel that it's really important that anybody who wants to work with their body shouldn't be held back financially. And I recently saw a paper that the Naturopathic College from Canada had given to its practitioners. And they were instructed that while you could talk about the immune system, you were not in any way allowed to prescribe or suggest anything that was going to be good for the prevention or the treatment of COVID. Now, I can understand maybe for the treatment because we're using anti-inflammatories and some immunosuppressants in order to be able to treat extreme disease at extreme levels of COVID. But when it comes down to prevention of any given disease, I'm gobsmacked as to how that's okay. So there are a lot of questions to ask. And as a public, we haven't demanded it. And I just really kept bringing Reich back to my mind because I just really felt like he demanded open dialogue. He demanded this kind of level of transparency. And as I was going through this talk, and I had seen a movie on Reich that I think Brandauer's in, and they were talking about MK Ultra, something I wasn't very familiar with, and that I've been taking polls, and a lot of people don't really know what it is. And Many of you do. I'll make it brief. I think we think that other countries are only evil enough to subject experimentation on their own people, but the CIA from the 50s until 1973 were actively, and you can look this up online, experimenting with Canadians and Americans in order to be able to figure out how to erase minds and work with mind control with Soviet agents. And this was huge experimentation, hugely secret, and often torturous, and sometimes led to death. And I bring this up because the virtues and the role of consciousness and destiny that were a fabric of the triad of politics and medicine of our past have been absent in our living philosophies for far too long. And we have to be very careful about how we're allowing censorship of medical doctors while we're allowing white supremacists to say whatever they want to, or revoking licenses of medical professionals who are asking for open dialogue. And of course, there are extremes on all levels, but we can't just shut down everything as misinformation. I think we're going in a very dangerous level. I think many would agree. And denying dialogue and debate and allowing censorship and segregation even, which is something ongoing even with the medical understanding that it no longer serves and tests serve better, can't really be part of the fabric of our society without dire consequences. So I bring this up because amidst all the reasons I admire Reich, I feel that the underlying pattern here, much like the hero's journey, that we're drawn to his work is that he was a man who really did carry vision and virtue in a time when we have largely stripped these critical guiding philosophies from our politics and our medicine. And he knew when he was standing in court that the issue was much bigger than selling an accumulator over a state line. But he was never given a chance to be properly assessed or addressed by the scientific community in a debate that may have saved his life. And so while we discuss and analyze his various directions, I think what may ultimately draw us to his work, much like this fractal story, as I was saying, of the hero's journey, is that we're inevitably drawn to the human search for an answer to the mystical. And while we'd like to remove the mystical from the equation, we're still, I think, going to keep running into the mystery. I find it interesting that the way we understand how the sun rises and sets, and we think that we've got it all kind of sorted. And meanwhile, we kind of fall asleep around the fact that we're spinning on a rock in space and we have no idea why we're here or how long we're going to be here or if it's going to hurt when we leave. And with that pocket full of confidence, we walk out into the world. So I feel that if we do really remove the equation and insist that everything be in the box of materiality, and I understand, of course, the importance of quantifying as much as we can, we're going to still keep running into the mystery. And I think that has to be taken into consideration so that we can weave our philosophies and our medicine and our politics back in a way that really allow us to carry the same kind of virtues that relate to consciousness expansion and making the world a better place, which is what they were all talking about. So if we do that, if we keep everything in a box of materiality, we lose our sense of awe and therefore our humility, and in doing so, our humanity. And that's all I have to say about that. Thank you very much for your time and for the ability to give this talk today. I don't know if there's time for questions.
Can you hear the applause?
Mm-mm.
Oh, there was applause.
Thank you.
We need a room microphone.
Pause between sentences. I don't know how to do that, sorry. Especially when I'm nervous.
Well, you just got to your second sentence. Okay, I'm just kidding. Do we have a question in the room?
No questions. Great.
Jim Sherwood.
I don't have a question. I just want to repeat what I wrote down at the end because it is the thing I will remember longest. We're all spinning on a rock in space with no idea why we're here. That gives us a certain humility to live by, I think.
Exactly.
So thank you.
Thank you. That was the point of my talk. I'm so glad that came through. I have a really great idea. I have a really great idea for next year's conference. I meant to say,
Yeah.
when Jim mentioned it this morning, this is a fantastic primer to get the people in the room who work on bodies to show. I mean, I would love to be hearing more what Fred is doing and Tina and everybody who's actually working and share what I mean, it would be fascinating to actually have an experimental conference like that. I think people would be really fascinated to come and listen to some key teachers work throughout the week. That's my thought on that.
I think we all are really interested in that. We just wanted to do it in a year when people were completely comfortable with physical contact. Okay.
I'm projecting that by next year, everything's going to be infinitely better.
So absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hi, Hovar.
Hi. Thank you for this. And I'm always struck by your talks. I feel like you give us what John Lennon and George Harrison tried to learn in 15 years in 1 hour. I feel like you're doing, I'm being thrown back into the 1960s and the quest for transcendental knowledge and so on. These fractals and the energy points, it's fascinating the way you draw the similarities between the maps of ancient religions and today's science. But if you were to pinpoint some key thoughts about the similarities between Reich's work with the segments and the most sort of important correlation that you see in ancient tradition, how would you summarize it? I mean, that's a huge question, but
yeah. In relation to the ancient traditions and Reich segments?
If you would pick the most important correlation to Reich segments in all of your maps.
Yeah, I was trying to fit that in. Thank you for that question. So the segments you can see when you saw that very fast montage of visualization, that his segments very much fall in line with all of these different systems. The Ida and Pingala, the 3 lines running down, the Sanjiao of Chinese medicine, all of these different ways, and they fit in a way that really helps map out. Now, of course, the main thing that Reich brought that's different is like Thomas Hanna as well in Somatics. Thomas Hanna has a wonderful way of what he calls the red light and the green light reflex, of understanding how the startle reflex responds. So Reich's work was so important because he was really taking something just from a very direct sensory space of his wonderful insight to be able to really witness where these blocks come from. And as was it Stanley Kalaman? No, it was Alexander Lowen, I think, who said that, we're very much like a worm in having these longitudinal and horizontal kinds of contractions that move in through the body. And Reich really mapped that, but it's foundational in understanding of how peristalsis works or swallowing or what have you. So all of these muscular maps that he connected to the mind and the psyche fit completely in tandem with the energetic maps when you see them. One thing I didn't say in that other slide where you had the Western and then the Eastern different philosophies, we tend to view things in linear fashion as if they're just cards on a table. But if we layer them on top of each other, we actually see that they fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. And that's what I tried to show. And Reich's understanding of armoring and where the mind and body meet is so pivotal to that. And I think a really main point of the puzzle. I don't know if I answered your question properly, Hovar, but that would be my best stab at it, I think.
Fine, thank you.
We have an online question from Yelena.
Hi, Yelena.
Are you going to unmute?
Yes. Hi, Meredith. I tried to ask a question, but I think now is a really good time. I don't know, has anyone looked at the work of Spurt on neuropeptides? Because I haven't seen her actual map of the neuropeptides in the body. I mean, she did the pioneering work on basis
Molecules
of
of emotion.
addiction, molecules of emotions, but that book doesn't have the map. She only gives the account of where you're just mapping out, you're mapping out the knees and well, that's what her work is. I mean, this is mainstream of neurobiology. So I'm just wondering, and there's one additional thing I believe it was in the Molecules of Emotion, where she talks about the frequencies, and this is the thing that you had.
You're cutting in and out a little bit, Yelena.
At the site. Yeah, sorry. The frequency of interaction. Okay, the frequency of the interactions at the site. These are electromagnetic interactions, right? But the frequencies are low frequencies, and they're actually the same as the frequencies of a kind of spoken voice. So there is a correspondence with mantras and sound healings and that sort of stuff. So it's a kind of a resonance, right? Because two things that vibrate at the same frequency, even if it's a different medium, they can lock into or into resonance and unlock certain stuck patterns. So I wondered if, if Reichians or you have looked into any of that. That's sort of a particular interest to me.
Yeah, I'd be very interested too. That's not my field of expertise to work with the neuropeptides and what have you. But there's a lot of people in, I know that I just gave a talk on the Global Sound Healing Conference with David Gibson, and he does a lot of work with the science of sound and different things. So I think that all of these, we're growing in a direction of creating this understanding more between where the energetic and the East and the West actually meet. So if you find information,
I'm afraid I should have mentioned that we are just about out of time.
Right. I just wanted to mention that I'm very much resonating with your words about the leading role that medicine, I think, the contemporary medicine could take in this whole unlocking of the griddle of information, misinformation, and proper place of man in the micro and the macrocosm of because of the traditional orientation towards humanism, which is inherent in the medical tradition.
Okay, again,
thank you.
I'm afraid we don't have time for any more questions in this session. We have to stretch our legs and begin the next one. So we'll have to say thank you to Meredith.
Thank you very much. Thank you.